It's a me, Mario's Corp Creations. I am so glad every one of you is here. It is Monday night. It is 7 o'clock in the PM in the Eastern Standard Time, and we are here for Monday Night Nerd. Thank you again for everybody joining tonight. Tonight's main topic, 90s video games. Are you excited? I'm excited because I've been a gamer since I was a little kid, and I can't wait to talk about all 90s video games. We're going to be talking about my first system. We're going to be talking about my love of fighting games. I'm a big Mortal Kombat fan, Street Fighter, Killer Instinct, Primal Rage, all the classics. Let's talk about Nintendo Power, and I have something very interesting to show you guys and a little story about it later on. We're going to be talking about having a Blockbuster night, because who doesn't remember Blockbuster from my generation and how great it was? And lastly, we're going to make a debate. We're going to ask some questions to people in the chat. We want you to answer the question, what is the best video game soundtrack from the 90s? I have my opinion. I can't wait to hear what yours is. But let's start things off tonight with some news. Now, only got a couple little news topics today, but we'll get right into the 90s video games. But first, speaking of 90s and video games, this Friday, or the past Friday, was Ash's last episode of Pokemon. Can you believe it that started in 1997? 1997, Ash went on his first adventure with Pikachu, and 20 some odd years later, he is now done. He has now gone off into, I believe the last shot of the episode was going off into the sunset, as Huo did in the first episode. It's crazy to think that protagonist has lasted so many generations, so many iterations, and after all this time, they haven't kept it going. They just said, nope, that's it. We're now going to move on to a different character. It kind of shocked me. I heard rumors earlier on in the year that they were going to end the series and that was going to be it. But I didn't think they would actually pull the trigger and say Ash is done. And from what I've heard, I mean, I'm not a giant Pokemon fan. I am a fan from back in the day. But I also heard that Team Rocket's done and almost that entire cast is done. And now we're going to get the next generation. I'm kind of shocked by that. I didn't expect it, but hey, every generation has their version of it. So I guess this will be the new generation of Pokemon starting. And they'll probably have another 10,000 random Pokemon that I'm unaware of, because I'm of the generation, I got to about 151 at Mew. And then everything after that, I kind of just went, yeah, it's a little too much for me. So good for them. Good for Ash. I heard the last episode was a great episode. A lot of callbacks to the first episode. And I heard a couple characters return that we haven't seen since pretty close to one of the first 2 or 3 episodes. So that was pretty cool. I'll probably check that out in the next day or two, because it's a lot of nostalgia for me. I grew up with Pokemon Red. That was my game. I didn't really go into the DS and the 3DS. I did Pokemon Red and then Stadium. I loved Pokemon Snap for N64. I had a lot of the cards growing up when the first gen came out. I still have my Charizard from when I was a kid. It's probably worth about the same as I paid for it, because I didn't find it a pack. I asked my mom to pay pretty much retail price for it, and she did. And I don't know why, but she said yes. So it's something from my childhood that lasted a certain length of time. I haven't watched it in so long, but again, it's great that Ash finally has had his goodbye, and I can't wait to see what the next generation is going to be, because that I think will be interesting to see how the next generation takes over after the Ash character is gone, because like I said, the Ash character seemed to just go through generation after generation after generation and didn't really have any issues with anybody wanting it changed. Or I think there were some different protagonists in the games, but no, I don't remember everybody saying change Ash in the show. So good for him, and good for Nintendo for keeping that going. And can't wait to see what the next run's going to be. So that was really cool to see. Let's jump in the next piece of news. We're going to talk about Shazam. I have not seen Shazam yet. And I have actually done something that I normally don't do. I am the person who likes to go into movies without any spoilers. I avoid websites and everything for good 24 to 48 hours before that movie comes out, before I go see it, because I usually end up going to see it on the debut night. But Shazam was different. I actually read some of the spoilers, and I'm not proud of it. I know, as a movie fan, I shouldn't be reading spoilers before I go see a movie, because I'm not I do know people who can instantly forget them by the next day, but it doesn't. It sticks with me. I heard what happens in the movie, and I kind of understand everyone's thoughts on it. The movie was, what I've heard, is not what everyone was hoping for based off how good the first one was. And I will be completely honest, I loved the first one. I thought the first one was a great interpretation of the character. Great having that dynamic of Billy Batson being kid and getting the responsibility of the gods, and sort of that he's a kid, but he's got to be an adult, but he's got to be a kid still. And that was always an interesting part of the character. And I think they hit that very well in the first movie. But I think when they introduced the family at the end of the first one, it did get me worried that the focus for the next movie was going to be about the family and not about Billy. And that seems to be a bit of the issue. Again, I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, so I'm not going to say, what I read. But I definitely think, I think everyone's well aware, based off, if you've read anything online, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson played a little bit a part of that and how the direction of the movie changed, because I think a lot of people thought, if you've read the comics, Shazam's villain is Black Adam. So I think we were all kind of expected that, well, we've got a Black Adam movie coming out, we've got a Shazam movie coming out, they got to fight at some point. But I think, due to different things when it comes to Warner Brothers and DC, Shazam went in one direction and Black Adam went a different direction, and wanted to fight a bigger hero and wanting to fight somebody like a Superman. And I don't think Warner Brothers was too cool with that. And I don't think Shazam was too cool with that. At least that's what the way Zachary Levi has sort of come out and said the past week. And I think Warner Brothers and that whole movie team and everything just kind of scrambled to try and make a movie. And I think they did the best they could. But I think you could tell they did the best they could, and it wasn't the best movie that could have happened. I think it somewhat similar to the Black Panther problem, where they had a vision of one thing, and because of an event, they had to change that, and they didn't have enough time to reconfigure it the way they wanted. I'm still going to see it. I'm still interested in seeing what it's actually like on the big screen. Hopefully I'll see it soon. My dance card's getting a little busy right now with stuff. Cosplay season's kind of starting up, so I'll hopefully see it soon. Zachary Levi will be at Fan Expo Canada this year. That is the first guest, and that's cool. I mean, that he's a big name right now. He's been at Fan Expo before, and he did fairly well from what I've heard. For those who don't know, I do volunteer at a bunch of the conventions, and I know a lot of people who do volunteer with guests and stuff, who volunteer with the celebrities. And from what I've heard, he's a great guy. If you're a fan of him, go meet him. I've not heard anything bad. He seems like a great guy, even just from interviews and such. So he will do well, especially with the Shazam movie going on right now. I'm worried about the Q&A, if they do a Q&A with him, because I got a feeling a lot of people are going to be pressing him for answers on this whole situation with the Black Adam and Henry Cavill Superman and all that stuff. But you're gonna have to wait and see, and we're all gonna have to go to Fan Expo to find out what his thoughts are on that. But going back to the main point, I think Shazam has had a rocky run for the first week, and I'm interested to see how it goes. I don't think it's gonna do much better. Maybe it'll gain a following when it comes out on streaming. I really don't know. It's not looking good for it. So I don't know if we're gonna get Shazam 3. Be interesting to see. But I will probably end up seeing it sooner or later. Last bit of news for the day, we're going to talk about the late, great George Perez. For those who don't know George Perez was an amazing, amazing graphic designer, graphic artist for Marvel, and I believe he did some DC stuff. You probably will recognize, I can't reach it because it's all the way up there. Actually, where is it? Where is it? There it is. That's weird. I can grab it. You probably will recognize him from this. This is the Infinity Gauntlet graphic novel, and I can thankfully say that I met Mr. George Perez just before he fell ill and got him to autograph this because this was an amazing graphic novel. And Marvel is doing something great in tribute for him, and they are going to be releasing a few special variant covers next month, I believe, June, sorry, with his artwork on it as a tribute to the late George Perez. We're going to be looking for Fantastic Four number 8. We're going to be looking for Avengers 2 and Scarlet Witch number 1 and Incredible Hulk number 1. Those will all have a variant version, which will feature George Perez's work from his, I think he's done versions of those characters. So it'll be nice to see that and have a little bit of a tribute issue. I know Marvel is very good at doing tribute issues for the various, if anybody's passed. I personally have the, which one is it? The Fantastic Four after Stan Lee passed away. It was Ben Grimm's wedding, and it was in tribute to Stan Lee, which was really nice. I liked the cover, and I liked that they did a little tribute to him. So look out for those in June. I might pick up a couple of them because I am a George Perez fan, and his artwork is very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's back in the day when comics before the George Perez era and that era of comics, it was very flat. It was very boring. I shouldn't say boring. It was very It was very dialogue heavy. It was very just flat. When you get to the George Perez's and other artists of that genre, you start to get a little more boldness of the colors, boldness of the action, boldness of big 2-page spreads. Great art, and I'm glad he's getting a little bit of a tribute now that unfortunately we have lost him. That is all the news we have today. It's a short news day. It's been kind of an uneventful week, which sometimes it's okay. It's okay to have a boring week sometimes. Let's do a little bit of a sponsor, and then we're going to jump into our main topic, 90s video games. So, sponsors for the night. As always, I think you all have come to realize that the main sponsor every single week of Monday Night Nerd is my wife, my beautiful, lovely wife, who, if it wasn't for her, I would not be here. I would not have the guts, cojones, whatever you want to say, to do this. Without her, I would probably be less than half the man I am right now. So, hun, thank you very much. I love you. Thank you for supporting me in all this. I really don't have a second sponsor. Who can I thank? You know what? Thank you. Anybody who is watching this video, whether it's live, whether it's in the future, thank you for watching. Thank you for being a fan of this. Thank you for being a fellow nerd and a fellow geek, or whatever you want to call yourself. Thank you for watching this. It means a ton. I'm just a guy sitting in front of a camera, talking into a microphone, which may go out to nobody, may go out to 100 people, 1,000 people, who knows. But if you are watching, thank you for taking your time out of your day to check this out. Greatly appreciate it. So you know what? You are our other sponsor for the night. So cheers to you. Thank you for being a fan. Now, thank you, Tara. Thank you for always tuning in. All right. 90s video games. Let's talk about 90s video games. Who from my generation does not love 90s video games? We all grew up with them. I don't think there is a single person I know who does not have a memory of 90s video games. Mine started very early. I was gifted a NES when I was probably 4, if not 5. I started super young into video games, and I would love to find out why. I don't know if it was just the trend of the time, and that's what was gifted, and my dad gave it to me, and it was obviously greatly appreciated because it definitely formed the nerd I am today. But that I think I remember seeing video games before. I think I remember going to somebody's house, and they had an NES before I had one. And I remember playing it, and it was just I think it was a cousin. I think it was one of my cousins. They had an NES, and it was the coolest thing ever. And then I ended up getting one, and it was having that at home to play whenever you wanted was just so cool. And the funny thing is, I remember having several different games throughout the couple years that I had it because it was somewhat later in the life cycle. It wasn't far along when I was able to get it when I was gifted a Super NES. So I didn't have a giant library available as a lot of people did in the later generations. But I remember having, Mario Duck Hunt was the one that came with the system. So we had that. And we had a couple others. And it always made me laugh. It makes me laugh looking back at it because when I had these games, and there's two specific, I remember being young and realizing that, you know, these are games that I'm never gonna beat. I remember playing Pac-Man and stuff when I was little, and it was one of those you're never gonna win. It's always gonna get to a certain point, you'll die, and the game will be over. And I remember playing these 2 games and being like, "Oh, that's just the way these games are. You get to a certain point and that's it." You never get to the ending of the game because there is no ending. It just keeps going and going and going. And I later found out there actually is an ending to both of these games. And the problem was these games are actually some of the most critically hard games to beat. And those were 2 of the games that I loved the most. And they were Top Gun for the NES and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. I loved both of those games, but I also was never more frustrated. If you've ever if you know about this Top Gun game, the Top Gun game, you are flying in a cockpit in the first level, and then the second level, or let's say 1.5 of the level, is you have to land on a helicarrier. If I remember correctly, you actually if you try and land it as the game tells you to, like it'll tell you to nose up, nose down, left, right, throttle, whatever. If you follow the in-game directions, you actually will crash every single time. You kind of have to mentally watch how to land, and that's how you do it. And I crashed every single time because I'm a kid and I'm following the game prompts and I'm just getting obliterated. And then the TMNT game is historically known as one of the hardest games to beat. And I would never even come close to getting through the game. And I just was like, that's me. I'm a kid. It happens. But I later find out, no, it's not me. It was the game. It was actually the game that was the problem. It wasn't me. I was a good gamer. The game was the problem. But yeah, I remember having that system and I played it to death. And the funny thing is, I own every one of my systems from a childhood. I have everything except the NES. The NES, when I was gifted the next generation, so from NES to Super NES, when I got the NES system, when I got the Super NES, I stopped playing the NES. And when I stopped playing the NES, my dad would take the NES or take the next system back, and he would take it home and play and bop around on it every once in a while. He's not a big gamer, but to kill time, he would throw a baseball game in or something. Well, when I was gifted the Super NES, he took the NES to his home and he actually sold it at a garage sale without really realizing. He didn't think I wanted it anymore. And I was heartbroken because I wanted it. Like, I didn't want to get rid of it. I just gave it to him because I wasn't playing it. Doesn't mean I don't want to hold on to it for a nostalgia factor. So I actually do not own my original NES. I don't know who he sold it to. I don't know where it is. I have a NES now. I've purchased another one since then, but I don't have half of the games because now it's just a nostalgia. It's just a nostalgia fix, and it's just something to sit on a shelf that looks good. So I don't even have Mario Duck Hunt anymore. I have Super Mario 3 and the Legend of Zelda 1 and Legends of Zelda 2. And those are actually, I bought those for my wife through the gold cartridges. So was never able to hold on to that one. It unfortunately slipped through my fingers. But the going from the NES to a Super NES, that was a jump and a half if you were a kid. That the Super NES is probably it's between the Super NES and the N64. Those are the two that if anybody says what's your favorite console, it's one of the two. I want to say I became more of a hardcore gamer in the N64, but that Super Nintendo has so many classic games. And it brought together one of my favorite fandoms, and that is Mortal Kombat. When I got that Super NES and I found out what Mortal Kombat was, and I found out what Street Fighter was, and I found out what Primal Rage was, and all these other fighting games, my mind was blown. The Seeing Mortal Kombat for the first time and seeing Scorpion rip the mask off and shoot fire and light someone on fire, and Sub-Zero doing the spine rip on a fatality, like it was as a kid, I completely as an adult, I completely understand where the ESRB comes into play because you never had that before. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying I see their perspective on it. It was something so different, and it sucked me in as a fan that was my fandom for the longest time. I knew everything about Mortal Kombat. I did research out the butt when it comes to that series. The When I was in grade school, I think it was grade 4, we went on a skating trip. We had gone a couple times during, I think it was like 4 or 5 times we ended up going to the local skating rink. And I think this was the last time, and it was definitely it was the last time. And my mom and dad, I will be completely honest, are divorced and have been divorced since I was 2. This was the first time they were actually going to go together to watch me ice skate. And skating around, doing laps. It was great. And then I took off like a bullet because I wanted to just show off. And when I went around the corner, my skates went out from under me and I face planted and split my chin open. I will explain the rest of the story another time. But after going to get stitches, my mom said, you were very brave. You did well. Let's get you something as a reward for being such a good patient. And we went to Shoppers Drug Mart, and I was looking through all of the store. And when I walked into the magazine aisle, they had, and I don't have it up here, they have the Mortal Kombat trilogy strategy guide for like $10. And I was like, this is what I wanted. And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, 100%. And I got it. And I read that thing. I don't know how it's not fallen apart. I read that thing so much. That was the holy grail to me as a Mortal Kombat fan because it had everybody in it. It had all their stats. It had all their moves, all their fatalities. I loved that book. And then you had spin-offs of Mortal Kombat that tried to replicate it, like Primal Rage was another one that I saw we had a local arcade just down the street at the local mall, and that game was just dinosaurs and apes and all these animals just tearing each other apart in like in a Mortal Kombat style fight. It was so cool back in the day to see that type of stuff. And like I said, I understand why the SRB was invented, because going from "It's a me, Mario, boop, 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 boop," to spine rips and tearing limbs off and stuff, I completely understand. But as a kid, just seeing that type of violence in a video game was just like, this is the coolest thing ever. And then you had, if you were a hardcore, really cared about frame rates and stuff, you had your Street Fighters, which were almost like a science to win at those. And then you jumped into the 3D world when it came to things like Killer Instinct, which is another series that I I know they did another version of it for the Xbox, because they're owned by Rare, and Rare is owned by Xbox and Microsoft. But I still think they should put that in across all platforms, because that game looked incredible. If you ever need a motivation song, go on YouTube after this video and type in Killer Instinct Select Fighter song. It's like a 10-second clip on repeat, but man, does it motivate you. It would probably be one of my first, probably one of top 3 gym songs, because it is so just that dun 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 dun. It's so good. I love that song, and it's actually a remake of the original song from the original game, which was on the Super NES. But yeah, having a Super NES was just, and the Super NES was definitely something that I saw even as a kid. I realized how big of a difference a game would be from the first game that comes out, or that first launch title, all the way up to the last game that comes out. Because when I first got Super Mario World, that was incredible, because you went from something like a Super Mario 3, which had an open world, or a world map that you could walk around and go to different levels and stuff. And then you went to something like Super Mario World, where it was like 3 times the size and all these different enemies, and it was so much different and so much better. But then when you look at something like probably one of my underrated, probably the most underrated game series out there. Once Donkey Kong Country came out for Super NES, that was a different level of graphic and a different level of game. That was a game that took that 3D style and put it onto a 2D background. That game, even today, when you look at that and you go, this was 1995, 6, like, it's insane what they pulled off with that game. And it's still a great game. The whole series, 1, 2, 3, are still some of the best games on the system. But the thing that I think brought video games to the next level, and I think something that goes highly underrated, because it really needs to be addressed, that Nintendo Power was like close to a religion for a kid at my age than you've ever seen. I remember being a kid, and our library at school had a monthly subscription to Nintendo Power, and we would almost fight each other to be the first person to borrow that book, because that magazine series does not get the credit it deserves. It is as we spoke about last week, or a couple weeks ago, about 90's comics. The Wizard magazine of that is the Nintendo Power. They are the exact same thing, but for different genres. And I am proud to say that I still own my Nintendo Power issue 100, and it's not in the best quality. And I can say this because the statute of limitations no longer is in play. I completely stole this from my grade school, because I knew, even at that age, the issue 100 of Nintendo Power was going to be an important magazine, and it was, because this was just when the N64 kicked in. And I want to say the N64 was probably a year into its life. And you're just scrolling through quickly, just flipping through. You've got, an amazing poster with all of the different past issues. You've got GoldenEye. You've got Madden, you've got Duke Nukem, you've got Mortal Kombat, you've got WCW versus NWO World Tour, you've got, before he became Conker's Bad Fur Day, Conker's Quest, the original game before he had a bad day, Ken Griffey Jr., Banjo Kazooie. This had almost every major title for the N64 in it. And I knew that if I didn't take it, someone was going to take it and never give it back. So I beat them to it, and I took it, and I still have in my collection. I sadly had many, didn't steal. Let me rephrase that. I didn't steal many more. That was the only one I stole. But I had many other Nintendo Powers in my collection over the years that I've bought from, garage sales, and I purchased them just off newsstands when they were out. And I unfortunately got rid of them. I unfortunately was at an age when they were starting to take up room, and I didn't think they would mean anything later on. And I unfortunately got rid of a lot of them. Man, am I kicking myself for it, because I would love to have all of them back. And now, if you try and find any of them on eBay or Kijiji or Facebook Marketplace, everybody wants like $20 an issue, and it's just out of control. So maybe one day when the nostalgia thing drops a bit, I can pick up a couple of them still. But it got about 10 still, but I used to have a lot more. And yeah, getting these every month, either at school or at the local newsstand, you just became the coolest kid in the world, because you had news about the gaming industry that your friends didn't. So you could go up and tell them, this is a cheat that's going to come out in the new game, or this is a preview of the new game, or look at this new screenshot of what characters are going to be in this game. It was so cool. And I think the internet, I don't want to date myself and say, the internet sucks now, because you can get all that right here, but it's just not the same. And that leads into the next topic of the greatest store ever as a kid, and that was Blockbuster. A lot of people have nostalgia for Blockbuster who grew up with it. And, there was a time when it was great. And I think I don't think it would work now. And we'll talk more about that later, because that is one of the questions that came in this week. Having everything as Netflix or whatever other streaming platform you have, it's great. 100% will never bash any of the streaming platforms. The convenience is 1,000 times easier. But going somewhere and finding, scouring the shelves and trying to find many different things and many odd movies that would stick out to you that you just don't find on Netflix, because Netflix has an algorithm and they try and shove what they think you want in front of you. So I feel like something's different and something's missing. And I think Blockbuster was able to give us that. It would give the opportunity to find movies you wouldn't normally want or normally look for. And I feel it's something cool. And it was a great place to go, especially as a gamer, because you went there and they had every game. Wasn't always in stock. And that's where the flip side comes in, is there were many times, and probably everybody who's ever done this can agree, there were many times when you would go in there and you would go, oh, it's that game. It's not in stock. Everyone's rented it already. And you get kind of bummed and you got to buy something else. But that was kind of the fun of it, because then you had to wait an extra week or an extra 2 weeks to come in and find it again, and then that anticipation built even more because you wanted to play it. Everybody gets everything right now, and that's great because, if you want something, you can get it, but having that little bit of anticipation and a little bit of patience just made that payoff so much better. So, having something like a Blockbuster was great, and, you know, I fully admitted that this may have ended up in my backpack and came home, and I will fully admit, because again, the statute of limitations is no longer present, especially because the company is no longer available. Um, there were many times when a game would be rented by me, and the kind people at Blockbuster would include the instruction booklet in with the game, and that meant a whole lot. Unfortunately, I had this really bad problem of not bringing back the instruction booklet with the game, because I found out really early on that you didn't really get charged if the instruction booklet didn't come back. So I fully admit that I have probably 20 instruction booklets with the Blockbuster logo or a handwritten Blockbuster on them, because those were cool. Those were mini versions of it, like a Nintendo Power, and it was really cool to have those. Like I know I at least have 2 copies of Yoshi's Story for N64 at my mom's place, and that's just oops. I will fully admit that just it happens, and that was kind of the cool thing, is if you got a rental and you got a little instruction booklet, that was like a little, hey, I wasn't expecting that. It's a little bit extra. So that was cool. And just, Blockbuster in general back in the day, we really didn't have anything else. This whole idea of streaming wasn't a thing. So, it's like saying, what would it be like to have $1 million? Well, I've never had $1 million, so I really don't know what it feels like to have $1 million. But now that you have $1 million, you kind of go, well, do I like having $1 million? Yeah, I like having $1 million, but there was also benefits of having less than $1 million. And, you know, the idea, like I said, the idea of going there and scouring the shelves, and even especially the games, like if you couldn't find the one you wanted, there was always other games there, and I can guarantee you there are games that I must have rented at some point that I had no interest in renting, but everything was already rented, so I had to pick something because I wasn't gonna go home empty-handed. And there were games that I rented that I'm like, "Oh, this is an amazing game. I'm glad I rented it," and I became a fan of the game or the series. So, it was nice to have that little bit of convenience out there, and like I said, I think what we have now, there really isn't anywhere to rent anything like that. You kind of have to buy it. You can do trials, you can do things like PlayStation Plus or Xbox Live, which is cool, but it's really hard to look at these little games and kind of, you'll miss out on a lot because you're just playing the major titles. And, there might be, like I said, there might be something out there that you may not have played if you may not play if you're just playing all the major titles. So I don't know, but I love Blockbuster. I have such a nostalgia fix for it. That's why I got the shirt, because I like making it a Blockbuster night. I know if there was a way, and you know what? Let me take that back. I was about to say if there was a one around here, I'd still use it. Even as a fan, I have to admit, I probably wouldn't, because there was a local video rental store within 5-minute walk from here, and it was the last one in the area, and we had moved into this house. We've been in this house for 5+ years, and within a year of us being here, they ended up closing. This was the scary part. They said they were going to start closing like the day before I got married. So like we were doing wedding prep, and I told my wife, like, I love you, I need to take a certain amount of money out of our budget, and I need to take a certain amount of time, and I need to go over there, and I need to buy, because they're putting everything on clearance. I need to buy certain things because this is the last time I'll ever get to. Because I knew when we got married, we ended up going on our honeymoon right after. And I knew by the time we got back from the honeymoon, everything would be gone. It would be basically just a big open space. So I knew I had to go over and get those things, and I did. But as I was walking around grabbing, a couple DVDs that I've always wanted, and then, a couple random odd things that only that location had, I realized even then the last time I was in there was years before. I'd been in the area for a year. And for those who don't know, I'm back living in the same area I grew up in. And I had been to that place a billion times. They almost knew me by name. And I realized by that point I wasn't going there. Even though I'm glad it was there, I knew I wasn't going. So I couldn't really be upset that they were closing because I wasn't helping them stay in business. So as much as it sucked to see them go, and as much as it sucked to see Blockbuster go, like I was heartbroken when Blockbuster left because there was so many things that I was renting from there. But then once I really broke it down into how much I was renting, because there were so many deals when Blockbuster was ending, I knew there was no way they were making profit. There was no way. Like they had the video game rental where it was like monthly rental fee and you could just rent games, boom, 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 boom. And it was something like you could rent 2 games at a time for, I think it was $20 or $30, let's say. Let's go crazy and say $30 a month. You can rent 2 games at a time and you can just boom, 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 back and forth all you want. I was living in a building with a buddy of mine, and we would just rent everything. Like we would just rent a game, play through it a bit. This is PS3 time, so you could play online. We would play it like crazy, and then within 3-4 days, we're back to Blockbuster and we're switching games. We probably ran through 10 games in a month. And I'm thinking to myself, man, if these were individual rentals and I'm renting them, they're charging $10. Again, I know it's probably high, but let's say $10 for a week. Like, you're losing money already. Like, yeah, I probably wouldn't have played a bunch of the series because if they were charged rentals, but still, like, I understood why they went out of business. And I knew that once Netflix came in, I saw the writing on the wall very quickly. And yeah, it sucks, but yeah, it's something that had to happen. Last little bit in the main event, I want to see what I've fought over this question many times. And many times I've had many different opinions, but I finally decided on what the answer is. What is the best Super NES soundtrack? There are thousands of iconic soundtracks for the Super NES. There is, Super Mario World is a classic. You've got Super Metroid. You've got Mortal Kombat 2, the Street Fighter 2 soundtrack. And then you've got all the Final Fantasies, which are just, they've gone on tour with those, and the Zeldas too, all the Legend of Zelda games. The best soundtrack for Super NES for me is Diddy Kong or Donkey. Let me try that again. The best soundtrack for a Super Nintendo game, in my opinion, is Donkey Kong Country 2. Diddy's Kong Quest is probably one of the best soundtracks from beginning to end. I have probably listened to that soundtrack just, kicking back, doing some work. I've probably listened to that 100 times. That soundtrack, from the more pirate themed for a couple of the Gangplank levels, all the way to the bonus stages, have great songs up until you do the roller coaster near the end of the game. all of those songs are smash hits. And it made me realize kind of what I said before, that the Donkey Kong Country series is such an underrated series. It is such an underrated when it comes to gameplay, when it comes to soundtrack, when it comes to everything else. I think that series, especially Donkey Kong Country 2, was such an amazing game in the 90s that I think because we had such an overblown amount of great content when it comes to, you know, 3 generations worth of games, and that's not even including, we haven't even got on the Sega Genesis. That was another thing. I never had a Sega Genesis. I never had a Sega Genesis growing up. I went from Nintendo to Super NES to N64, but I completely understand why the Sega Genesis was as good of a console as it was. I own one now, and I own a couple of the Sega Genesis collections, and having games like Sonic, having games like what's that fighting game? Not Primal Rage. I can't think of it. Wow, I'm totally blanking on Sega Genesis games. Even games like Echo the Dolphin. That's another game I think gets a lot of flack for being, some people might say it's a dorky game. That's a pretty fun game, I will fully admit. And they've had so many Sega Genesis collections over the years, and they're all amazing. And it just showcases how great of a system that was. And being in the middle of that war of, you kind of have to pick. Like, if your friends bought a Sega Genesis and you have a Super Nintendo, you're not having a lot of conversations the next day at class because you're playing one thing and they're playing another. So yeah, the Sega Genesis was a great console, but it just wasn't for me. I was a born and bred Nintendo fan up until the GameCube. And that's, once we hit the 2000s, I had a friend who was getting rid of a PlayStation 2, and he actually gifted it to me with, I think, 10 other games for a very good price. And that's when I went, ooh, I think I have a new love. And that's when it became a giant PlayStation fan. And that's kind of the way I've been ever since. Now I'm going, if you play Xbox, I'm sorry, I don't have much to say. I'm not passionate. Xbox is a great system. I love Halo. I beat Halo at a friend's house. I played it that much. Great console. It's just not for me. I'm a PlayStation guy. But yeah, the 90s video game world was just insane. From, like I said, from starting off with the Super NES, going into, from the NES to the Super NES to the N64 to, all these amazing things. And then having all of this readily available at Blockbuster was just like, it was a different thing back then. And I don't think, it's not that I don't think the kids appreciate it today, but I think having everything pretty readily available online is something that's a very good convenience. But I think, there's a little bit of, there was something extra when you went to no, to Fandom Frontier. No, Shaq Fu was not the best retro fighter ever. Really, Shaq Fu? Supposedly the remake that came out, I think it was for the PS4, was actually pretty good. That was supposedly pretty good, but the original Shaq Fu, no. It's a great idea. It's a great concept. It is a terrible, terrible game. It's surprising. I don't own that one. I thought that would, I was looking for it for a short period of time because I remember the price before the nostalgia craze kicked in and everyone went nuts on the prices. I remember seeing it for a pretty good price at a couple stores, and I debated on getting it. And I really should have, but I didn't. But 90s video games were amazing. Thank you all for joining tonight. It is 7:48 in the PM. Please, if you haven't already, like, share, subscribe, send this to some friends, send this out to your fans, your family, whoever you want. I hope I entertained you tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let's hop into a last bit, and let's do some Q&A. We have 3 questions tonight. Let's start off. First question: is there a movie you're looking forward to reviewing? Now, this question has to do with my announcement yesterday, and I've announced it a little bit here and there, but officially, I You can't see it, but I have a poster over here that is 100 movies you must see before you die. And this list, like I said, like it's self-explanatory. I'm going to be watching each one of these movies, and then I'm going to post a review of them. Some of these I've seen before. I am a big movie fan, so I've seen, I think I counted at least 10 to 20 of them. But there are many of them that I haven't seen, and I've seen enough of them to get the concept, but I really should watch the whole movie. I will admit I sent this to I called my buddy Sean and told him about this. I was going through it. He's a giant Lord of the Rings fan, as many people are. I never have seen Lord of the Rings. I know I'm giving up my nerd card when I say that, but I've never watched Lord of the Rings. That is one of the movies on here. So I will be watching Lord of the Rings at one point, and I promise not to fall asleep through it. One thing that caught my eye, though, is that Back to the Future 2 is on here, not 1. I mean, I know I've seen all the Back to the Future, so I know what number 2 is about, but it's kind of shocking that number 2 is on here because I feel like you need to see number 1 before you see number 2. I mean, you could probably watch it on its own and be okay, but I feel like you still need to see the first one to kind of get the idea of it. Terminator 2 is on here, and I feel that one you could watch on its own and not need much. You don't need to see the first one to get it. Same with Star Wars. Star Wars Empire Strikes Back is on here, but not the first Star Wars, which I kind of understand because Empire is the big one. So, yeah, you might want to see the first one, but if you haven't seen Star Wars by now, you probably aren't going to. So, what am I interested in seeing? I'm definitely interested in seeing The Social Network. That is a movie that I've always kind of been like, I should watch that, and I never have. What else? I'm trying. There's such a glare, I can't really see all of them. Fargo is another one. Fargo is definitely another one that I'm interested. Again, I've seen enough of it to kind of get the concept of the movie, but actually sitting down and watching it. For those wondering, and I mentioned it yesterday in my Instagram stories, the first movie on the list is A Clockwork Orange. Who the hell starts a list of movies with that one? Like, for those who know that movie, that is a rough movie to get through. So I'm starting it off with a bang on that one. But yeah, I should be watching them in the next little while. I think I'm going to bank a couple just to make sure to get started and get into the rhythm of things in case, stuff comes up and I can't watch them. So I'm probably going to watch a couple of them and then I'm going to start doing some reviews. But yeah, definitely Social Network and Fargo are the two that I'm like, this will be interesting. Tara said Justin Timberlake's pinnacle of acting. You know what? Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've heard he is very interesting in that movie. So having seen a little bit of JT, seeing JT in that movie, be interesting. He's a good actor. You know what? I will admit, I wasn't an NSYNC fan, as we've talked about in previous episodes. I was a Backstreet Boy fan, but he ain't a bad actor. I will give him credit. He's done some pretty good roles that I'm like, you know what? He ain't bad, buddy. So, number 2, do you think Blockbuster is coming back? Now, this kind of goes back to what we said before. If you don't know, Blockbuster I think they officially announced it today or yesterday. They are going to be opening 5 locations in the LA, San Diego area as sort of a nostalgia run. Do I think they're going to go full tilt and come back? No, sadly not. I think these will be little niche stores that you can maybe come in and pick up some merchandise. I know there is the last remaining Blockbuster in Ohio, I think it is. No, I don't think it's going to be anything more than a little, nostalgia trip, going in, seeing what the stores look like back in the day. Maybe I don't even think you'll probably be able to rent anything because just the idea of having that much physical inventory of movies and stuff is just, I don't see it happening. I think that was a time that was great and we all loved it, but I think that time has passed and we can all sit back and watch the old commercials and, love what we love, but I think yeah, it's over. So, sadly, times have moved on. Last question of the night. Favorite video game from your childhood? Woohoo! Okay. Favorite video game from your childhood. Now, that's a tough question because we have, if we're going based on the topic of the night, we're going to say the 90s. So that's at least 3 generations of consoles I have to go through. So that is NES, Super NES, and N64. If we go by time spent on a game, I think we can all say that GoldenEye for the N64 is probably near the top for most people. Do I think that was my favorite game? Hit and miss. I think it was a great game. I think it has great replayability. I think that was, well, obviously that the first game that you can do a co-op first person shooter was a big change to the industry. So I think us just enjoying that. I probably know more people who play multiplayer on that game than have ever touched the story. As a wrestling fan, I probably spent a lot of time playing WCW NWO Revenge. Honestly, and it's funny to say, my favorite game from my childhood was Conker's Bad Fur Day. Just because of, kind of going back to the wow factor of video games in the day. That game for the N64, and I know we're pushing it because I think that was almost 2000, 2001. So we're still going to consider that as it was an N64 game. That was the first adult game for the N64. I think the only adult game for the N64. That was just insane as a kid to get the movie references in it, to get all the dirty humor, and being a kid being like, I'm going to get in trouble for playing this. But it was such a fun game. And it was so, I enjoy games like Banjo-Kazooie and other platformers like that. But Conker's just had that extra humor, just made it so much more fun. And having even just a fun multiplayer, that's another game. That multiplayer in that game is fun because you had so many different choices. And I know they're with Rare, and Rare's got a history recently of just kind of taking nostalgia and throwing it down the toilet. I still think that holds up as a great game, and I think it's one of the hardest games to find now because a lot of retailers didn't want to stock it because it was an adult rated game. So I think that is probably one of the harder games to get. And thankfully, I was smart enough before the nostalgia kick, the nostalgia boom, I was able to pick up a copy of that. And I actually have that complete in box. That is the first, yes, that is the first complete in box N64 game that I own. And I'm proud to say that because I knew even then that was going to be a pain in the arse to get. So I'm going to go Conker's Bad Fur Day. That is also, we're going to side topic before we get going. That is definitely a cosplay I would love to do. I've always tried to figure out, and it's not Conker. I have always wanted to try to figure out how to do the Great Mighty Pooh from Conker's Bad Fur Day as a cosplay. I have no idea how I would do it. I don't know how I would make it work, but that is a cosplay that I have always had in my mind. Like, how do I pull this off? Because it's a giant piece of poo in basically a bowl that has Conker running around. So yeah, that would be an interesting cosplay to do. But anyways, that is our show for the night. That is episode 6 of Monday Night Nerd. thank you all so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. This is the end of 90s month. I hope you guys enjoyed the month as a whole. I know I've got some ideas, maybe not next month, but in the future, maybe doing millennial month or millennium month and doing the 2000s and doing 2000s, movies and different things like that. We will be back to non 90s topics next week. I wrote a couple of them down, but I can't think about it. So you're going to have to check out my social media to see what the next episode is going to be. But I will be back next week for the next episode of Monday Night Nerd. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. Thank you guys, as always, for liking, subscribing, sharing, and letting people know that I do this every Monday night at 7 p.m. Have yourselves a good night. Have yourselves a good week, and I will see you all next Monday. See you then.